3 nights, 3 ordinary people, 3 moments where a single decision meant the difference between making it home or becoming another missing person. The first story comes from a woman in Florida who finally agreed to a night out after weeks of saying no. It was supposed to be nothing more than drinks with coworkers. Instead, she woke up with hours of her memory gone, a damaged car, and one horrifying realization. Simone had been waiting for her while she was too drugged to defend herself. The second story follows a group of teenage scouts exploring coastal sand dunes after dark. What started as a harmless tradition quickly turned into a nightmare when they realized they weren't wandering through those hills alone. Someone else was out there, hiding in the darkness, silently following every move they made. And the final story is about a bartender who made the mistake of rejecting a customer who refused to take no for an answer. What happened after her shift ended would leave her checking over her shoulder every single night for years afterward. Each of these stories happened in completely different places to completely different people. But they all share one terrifying lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous people don't look dangerous at all. And when your instincts start screaming that something isn't right, you'd better listen. Because every person you are about to hear from survived. For one reason, they trusted that feeling before it was too late. Back in 2017, I was living in St. Petersburg, Florida, and if you asked anyone who knew me back then, they'd all tell you the same thing. I was a complete homebody. I never cared much for bars, clubs, or the whole nightlife scene. After work, I usually went straight home, watched a movie, ordered takeout, and called it a night. That was my routine, and honestly, I was perfectly happy with it. One of my coworkers, Jenna, couldn't understand that. She was about 10 years younger than me and loved going out every weekend. For weeks, she'd ask me to come with her and another coworker named Mira. Every time, I'd smile, thank her, and politely say no. Eventually, though, she wore me down. After hearing "come on, just one night" over and over again, I finally agreed. I figured maybe I needed to get out of my comfort zone for once. Looking back now, I wish I had trusted my first instinct and stayed home. The following weekend, Jenna came over to my apartment before we headed out. She wanted to leave her car at my place so I could drive us both. That immediately made me nervous. I'd lived in St. Pete for almost 4 years, but I barely knew the city outside my neighborhood. I wasn't someone who explored downtown or bounced between clubs on weekends. The longest drive I normally made was to the Walmart a few miles away. Anywhere beyond that, I depended completely on my GPS. Still, I brushed those worries aside. We picked up Mira from her apartment, waited while she finished getting ready, and then all 3 of us headed toward downtown. Eventually, we found ourselves outside a crowded nightclub packed with people enjoying their Saturday night. Music echoed through the walls before we even walked inside. Colored lights flashed across the dance floor while conversations blended together with laughter and booming bass. For a little while, everything felt completely normal. We found a place to stand and ordered drinks. I started relaxing, thinking maybe Jenna had been right all along. Maybe I really did need a night out every once in a while. Then everything changed. Only a few minutes after we got our drinks, Jenna suddenly looked across the room and smiled. "Oh, I know someone over there," she said. She asked Mira to come with her, leaving me standing there alone. I remember feeling irritated. After practically begging me to come out for weeks, they disappeared almost immediately, leaving me by myself in a club where I didn't know a single person. Several minutes later, they came back looking excited. "My friend bought us another round," Jenna said, handing me a fresh drink. I didn't question it. She was my coworker. We'd worked together long enough that I trusted her completely. If she said the drinks were fine, why wouldn't I believe her? So I drank it. Her friend bought another round not long after that. By my third drink, something felt wrong. Not drunk, not dizzy, not like alcohol. It was something far worse. A crushing wave of dread settled over me for no reason at all. The music suddenly sounded distant. The crowd no longer felt fun. Every instinct inside me started screaming that I needed to leave immediately. I turned toward Jenna. "We have to go," I told her. I don't remember whether she argued. I don't remember walking out of the club. I don't even remember getting back into my car. The next clear memory I have is sitting behind the steering wheel outside Mira's apartment complex. Jenna and Mira were talking beside me. To this day, I have no idea what they actually said. I can't remember a single sentence, but somehow, whatever I heard triggered the strongest survival instinct I've ever experienced. It wasn't logical. It wasn't based on facts. It was pure instinct. Every part of my body was telling me one thing: get away right now. Without thinking, I slammed the car into drive and sped away. The drug in my system was unbelievably powerful. I'd only had 3 drinks, and anyone who has been to clubs knows those drinks usually aren't very strong to begin with. There was no reason I should have been losing hours of memory. Someone had put something in my drink. I just didn't know who or why. The next several hours are almost completely missing. I remember driving aimlessly through St. Petersburg, desperately trying to figure out how to get home. The streets looked unfamiliar. Nothing made sense. My brain felt like it was trying to solve a puzzle while every single piece was missing. Then another memory suddenly comes back. I was stopped at a red light. Out of nowhere, two men appeared beside my driver's side window. Before I could react, someone grabbed my door handle. Then the door started opening. For a split second, I completely froze. My car automatically locked every door the moment I shifted into drive. I knew that for a fact. So how was someone opening it? Both men were pulling on the door, trying to get inside. That instant of absolute terror somehow snapped me out of the mental fog just enough. I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal. The light hadn't even changed yet. I didn't care. I accelerated through the intersection, leaving both men behind before they could climb into my car. Even now, I still don't know who they were, or what would have happened if they'd gotten inside. After that, everything disappears again. The next thing I remember is sitting alone in my parked car near a quiet residential neighborhood. I was staring down at my phone, trying to figure out how to unlock it. Something as simple as opening the GPS suddenly felt impossible. The drug had turned my thoughts into complete chaos. I looked around. The street was empty. No people, no traffic, no movement. For whatever reason, my brain convinced itself I was finally safe. I leaned my seat back, closed my eyes, and passed out. When I woke up around 5 in the morning, the fog had finally started lifting. For the first time in hours, I could think clearly enough to use my phone. I opened my GPS, drove straight home, walked inside, and collapsed into bed without even changing clothes. A few hours later, around 11 that morning, I woke to nearly 20 missed calls. Most of them were from Jenna. The rest were from another friend who had apparently been trying to figure out where I'd disappeared to. When I finally called Jenna back, she sounded frantic. "Where did you go?" she asked. I couldn't believe she was asking me that. I answered honestly, "Your friend drugged my drink. I wasn't staying around to find out what happened next." There was a brief silence. Then she said something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. "The spiked drinks weren't meant for you." Everything stopped. She hadn't denied that the drinks were drugged. She hadn't sounded surprised. She simply admitted they were intended for someone else. That single sentence destroyed every bit of trust I had left. She later came by to pick up her car. I never confronted her. I never argued. I simply decided that after that day, she would never be part of my life again. But before she arrived, one final memory suddenly came rushing back. Those two men, the car door, the handle. I walked outside to inspect my vehicle. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then, I noticed my driver's side door handle. The plastic cover surrounding it was completely gone. It hadn't fallen off. It had been ripped away. In that moment, every horrible memory became real. Those men hadn't been hallucinations. Someone really had tried to force their way into my car while I was drugged, confused, and completely vulnerable. If I hadn't trusted that overwhelming feeling telling me to drive away, I honestly don't know if I'd be here telling this story today. People always say to trust your instincts. After that night, I don't believe that is just good advice anymore. I believe it saved my life. I grew up in a lively little coastal town that completely transformed depending on the season. During the summer, the place was packed with tourists. Families filled the beaches, restaurants stayed busy until late at night, and every parking lot seemed full before noon. But once school started again and the weather cooled down, everything became quiet. The crowds disappeared, leaving behind empty streets, calm beaches, and long stretches of sand that suddenly felt much more isolated. One of the most popular places in town was a massive system of sand dunes that stretched for miles along the coastline. People loved walking there during the day. Parents brought their kids, dog owners took their pets. Couples went there to watch the sunset. Even if you wandered off one of the paths, it was almost impossible to stay lost for long. Walk far enough in any direction and you'd eventually end up back on the beach or near the parking lot. It always felt safe, at least during daylight. This happened just a few weeks after school started again. I was part of our local scout group, specifically the oldest section called the Ventures. Every Thursday evening, all the different scout groups met for activities between 7 and 9 o'clock. The first meeting after summer break followed the same tradition we'd done for years. The younger scouts would hike to the tallest dune in the area, a massive hill everyone called the Baldy Man. Once they reached the top, they officially became scouts. While they made the hike, the older Ventures stayed behind near the parking lot practicing first aid. About 45 minutes later, we finished early. Since we still had plenty of time before everyone headed home, a few of us decided we'd walk out to meet the younger scouts. The tide was unusually high that evening, which meant we couldn't take the easier route along the beach. Instead, we had to weave through the dunes themselves. There were 9 of us altogether, but 4 of us. My friend Noah, another guy named Thomas, a friend named Ewan, and me walked much faster than everyone else. We called back to our leader, letting them know we were heading toward the scouts first. The rest stayed behind, spreading themselves out through the dunes so we'd have reference points when it came time to find our way back. At first, everything was fun. We laughed as we stumbled through loose sand. Every few steps, someone would lose their footing and roll halfway back down another hill. Sharp beach grass scratched our legs while thorny bushes caught on our clothes whenever we cut through the narrow paths. The only real light came from the moon overhead. In the distance, we could barely make out the silhouettes of the younger scouts standing on top of the baldy man. They looked much closer than they actually were. After what felt like forever climbing one hill after another, we stopped for a quick break on top of a ridge. Looking back, we spotted 2 of the other ventures standing on another ridge behind us. We waved. They waved back. I reached for my water bottle, took a drink, and screwed the cap back on. Then Thomas suddenly raised his hand. Shh. The 4 of us immediately fell silent. What? Noah whispered. Thomas stared into the darkness. His expression changed. You guys didn't hear that? We all looked around. Nothing, just silence. No wind, no footsteps, no voices, no, I answered. Thomas kept staring into the bushes beside us. I swear I heard something moving. We all listened. Still nothing. It had been an incredibly calm night, not even enough wind to make the grass sway. Eventually, we convinced ourselves it must have been an animal. Or maybe Thomas had simply imagined it, so we kept going. About 10 minutes later, we finally reached the younger scouts gathered at the top of the baldy man. We congratulated the newest scouts, chatted for a few minutes, and realized it was getting much darker than any of us expected. Without flashlights, staying out much longer wasn't a good idea. So we started heading back. Running downhill was much easier than climbing. Before long, we recognized the same ridge where we'd seen the other ventures waiting. Sure enough, they were still there. Relieved, the 4 of us climbed up to meet them. The 2 waiting there were Cormac and Alice. Cormac was impossible to miss. He stood around 6'3", built like he belonged on a rugby team, and was probably one of the smartest people in our school. Alice was the complete opposite. Quiet, calm, always observant. But the moment we reached them, something immediately felt wrong. Even in the darkness, I could see genuine fear on both of their faces. Alice looked like she was trying not to cry. Cormac wasn't saying anything. Noah broke the silence. What is going on? Cormac looked directly at me. Were you walking around down there by yourself? He pointed toward a clearing surrounded by hills. I frowned. I've been with these guys the whole time. Why? Cormac took a slow breath before answering. We thought we saw you. Everyone stayed silent. But it wasn't you. My stomach immediately tightened. He continued. There was a man. He had his hood up. Completely dressed in black. He kept circling that clearing. He was staying just far enough away that it looked like he was trying not to be seen. Alice nodded immediately. We thought it was you at first. But then we realized whoever it was wasn't acting like you. Cormac pointed back toward the ridge we'd left earlier. When you waved at us, you disappeared over the hill. Only a few seconds later, that same man walked on to the exact spot where you'd been standing. He just stood there, watching the direction you'd gone. The words hit all of us at once. Nobody said anything. Every single one of us remembered Thomas hearing movement in the bushes earlier. He hadn't imagined it. Someone had been there, watching us, following us in complete darkness, without making a sound, without carrying a flashlight. The realization sent a chill through every one of us. There were 6 of us together now, and suddenly none of us wanted to split up again. Safety in numbers, that became the only thing that mattered. We carefully made our way toward the clearing where Cormac and Alice had spotted the stranger. The entire walk felt wrong. Every shadow looked like someone hiding. Every patch of grass seemed ready to move. Alice quietly said something that made my blood run cold. He didn't even have a flashlight. She was right. Anyone familiar with those dunes knew how dangerous they became after dark. No normal person would wander through them alone without any light. Unless they weren't there to enjoy the scenery. Cormac and Alice hurried off to warn the scout leaders while the rest of us stayed behind, watching every direction at once. The silence became unbearable. Minutes later, they returned with the leaders, and everyone agreed it was time to leave immediately. The entire scout group began making its way back toward the parking lot. Nobody talked much anymore. The younger kids sensed something was wrong. They stayed close together. The older ventures constantly looked over their shoulders. We were nearly out of the dunes when everything exploded into panic. One of the younger scouts suddenly screamed. The sound echoed across the dunes. Everyone stopped. Noah and I ran toward the terrified kid. He was crying so hard he could barely speak. Finally, he pointed toward a nearby ridge. I turned, and there he was. A man dressed entirely in black, standing perfectly still. Watching every one of us, even from that distance, he never moved, never spoke, never looked away. Then Noah shouted words I'll never forget. "Run, I think he has a knife." That was all anyone needed to hear. The older ventures immediately grabbed the youngest scouts. Some carried children who couldn't keep up. Others practically dragged them across the sand. Nobody looked back. Nobody wanted to know if the man had started following us. We just ran. Every step felt slower than the last as the parking lot finally came into view. Only once everyone reached the cars did we stop. Parents arrived one after another, collecting frightened children while leaders explained what little they knew. I never saw that man's face. And honestly, I don't ever want to. To this day, I have no idea why someone would wander through pitch-black sand dunes alone, dressed completely in black, silently following a group of teenagers and children. Maybe he was waiting for someone to become separated. Maybe he had completely different intentions. I'll never know, and that is something I am perfectly okay with sometimes. Not knowing is a lot easier than discovering the truth. This happened when I was 22 years old, back when I worked as a bartender at a small neighborhood dive bar just a few blocks from my apartment. It definitely wasn't one of those trendy places you'd see all over social media. It was the kind of bar where the same faces showed up every week. Local construction workers, mechanics, retirees, and sports fans would come in after work, grab a few drinks, complain about life, watch whatever game happened to be on television, and head home. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked it. The staff got along well, the regulars usually tipped decently, and because I lived so close, I almost always walked home after my shift. The walk only took about 7 minutes. I'd done it hundreds of times. Eventually, it stopped feeling dangerous altogether. That confidence almost got me killed. Among the regular customers was a man named Jared. I only knew his name because I'd seen it printed on his credit card every time he paid. He looked like he was somewhere around his late 30s. His hair was thinning. He always wore the exact same faded brown jacket no matter how hot or cold it was outside. He always came alone, and from the very beginning, he made me uncomfortable. Unlike everyone else, Jared barely watched the games on television. Instead, he watched me, not constantly. Not in an obvious way. But every time I glanced across the bar, I'd catch him looking in my direction before quickly pretending to be interested in something else. Whenever I walked past, he'd find another excuse to start talking. Sometimes he'd ask where I lived. Sometimes what I liked doing outside of work, whether I had plans that weekend, if I had siblings. Questions that weren't necessarily inappropriate on their own, but together, they felt far too personal. I always answered politely. Working behind a bar means smiling through a lot of uncomfortable conversations. Still, I never encouraged him. I kept every answer short and professional. I hoped he'd eventually lose interest. Instead, he became more persistent. One Friday night, Jared came in around 10 like he usually did. He ordered a single beer, then spent almost an hour slowly nursing it while barely taking his eyes off me. Near closing time, after most of the customers had already left, he waved me over. "I've been thinking," he said. "You want to hang out sometime?" I smiled politely. I am flattered, but I like keeping work and my personal life separate. The change in his face happened instantly. The friendly expression disappeared. He forced a tight smile, dropped cash on the counter, then muttered, "Yeah, whatever." He walked out without leaving a tip. That may not sound like much, but he'd always tipped before. Something about the way his mood shifted so quickly left me feeling uneasy. Still, I told myself I was overthinking it. Midnight rolled around. The next bartender came in to cover the overnight crowd while I counted my tips, grabbed my hoodie, clocked out, and started my usual walk home. The streets were almost empty. Everything felt normal until I heard someone call my name. My stomach dropped immediately. I turned around. Standing beneath a street lamp was Jared. I hadn't even heard him approach. He gave a small wave before casually walking toward me. "I just wanted to apologize," he said. "I got embarrassed earlier. I overreacted." Part of me wanted to walk away immediately. Instead, I stayed where I was. "I didn't want to escalate the situation. It is okay," I replied. "But I really need to get home." He nodded, then asked one more question. "Can I at least get your Instagram or Snapchat?" "I promise I won't bother you." I shook my head. I don't really use social media, he stared at me. Then smiled only. This smile felt different, cold, almost amused. That is funny, he said. I've seen you on Instagram while you were working. My heart immediately started racing. I had never given him my account. I had no idea how he even knew I had one. For the first time that night, I genuinely felt afraid. Please leave me alone. His smile never disappeared. Okay, have a good night. I turned and continued walking for a few seconds. Everything was quiet. Then I heard footsteps, slow, steady, behind me. I told myself not to panic. Maybe he just happened to be walking the same direction. I looked back. He was about half a block away, walking behind me. I walked faster, so did he. I slowed down. He slowed down. It was like he was matching every movement I made. I kept telling myself maybe I was imagining it. Maybe he'd turned down another street. Maybe I was overreacting. But he never turned. When I finally reached my apartment building, I made a decision. Instead of walking directly to the entrance, I crossed the street. If he really wasn't following me, he'd keep going. Instead, he stopped. Exactly when I stopped. He stood beneath a large tree, hidden in the shadows. Even from across the street, I somehow knew. He was still smiling. I finally shouted, "Why are you following me?" "I don't want to call for help." He didn't answer. He simply stood there, frozen, watching me. Desperate, I lied. "My boyfriend's inside. I am going to get him." The truth was, I lived alone. I hurried to my building's front entrance and punched in the security code. The door buzzed open. The moment I pulled it open, I heard sprinting footsteps. I looked back. Jared was running straight toward me. I threw myself inside. The heavy door slammed shut behind me. I didn't even wait to see if it had locked properly. I bolted toward the stairs. My apartment sat on the second floor at the very end of the hallway. As I ran, I heard the building's main door crash open. He had made it inside. His footsteps echoed through the stairwell. Louder, closer, faster. I reached my apartment. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys behind me. His footsteps kept getting closer. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, the key slid into the lock. I threw the door open, jumped inside, and slammed it shut. I locked it. Just as Jared reached the hallway. A split second later, bang, his entire body slammed into my apartment door. The impact shook the walls. I screamed. Then, another crash hit the door, even harder. He wasn't knocking. He was trying to force his way inside. I backed away while grabbing my phone. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely dial. Then, another apartment door opened. A man's voice shouted from the hallway. "What the hell are you doing?" Instant silence. A few seconds later, running footsteps headed back toward the stairs. I slowly looked through my peephole. My elderly neighbor stood in the hallway looking confused. Jared was already disappearing down the staircase. Gone, my neighbor gently knocked on my door. When I opened it, I completely broke down. I couldn't stop shaking. Between sobs, I told him everything. He stayed with me until police arrived. The officers took the situation seriously from the very beginning. I gave them Jared's full name using the information from his credit card receipts at the bar. The building owner pulled the hallway security footage. My boss handed over surveillance video from inside the bar. The evidence showed exactly what had happened. The following day, an officer called me. They had officially identified Jared Perez. Detectives were sending the case to the prosecutor. The charges included stalking and unlawful entry after chasing me into the building and attempting to force open my apartment door. Hearing those words made everything feel terrifyingly real. But for the first time, I also felt like someone believed me. The very next day, I went to the courthouse and filed for a restraining order. After reviewing the police report and security footage, the judge approved a temporary order almost immediately. Police served Jared shortly afterward. Eventually, prosecutors moved forward with additional charges connected to the attempted break-in. Justice was finally catching up to him. I kept working at the bar for a while after everything happened. But one thing changed forever. I never walked home alone again. Even today, whenever I leave work late at night, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, checking every shadow, listening for footsteps. Because once you've experienced someone turning a simple walk home into the most terrifying night of your life, you never completely stop wondering if someone is following you. Those 3 stories happened in completely different places, different states, different people, different circumstances. Yet they all have one thing in common. None of the victims expected that night to become one of the most terrifying experiences of their lives. Trish thought she was simply going out with coworkers she trusted. The scout group believed they were following a tradition they'd done safely for years. Megan assumed her 7-minute walk home would be just like every other night. But predators don't usually announce themselves. They blend in. They wait. They look for moments when someone is distracted, isolated, or vulnerable. Sometimes they're the friendly face buying drinks at a bar. Sometimes they're the silent figure hiding in the darkness. And sometimes they're the person who has been smiling at you for weeks while secretly learning everything they can about your life. If there's one lesson these survivors all share, it is this: never ignore that feeling in the pit of your stomach. Your instincts notice things your conscious mind hasn't figured out yet. If someone makes you uncomfortable, leave. If a situation suddenly feels wrong, trust yourself. If your gut tells you you are in danger, don't worry about being polite. Getting home safely will always matter more than hurting someone's feelings. Because every single person you heard from tonight walked away with a story to tell. But not everyone gets that chance. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another terrifying collection of real-life encounters. And if you've ever experienced something that still gives you chills to think about, feel free to share your story in the comments. Stay safe, stay aware, and as always, thanks for watching.